I remember I met every week with one of our pastors, and every Tuesday I'd drive to his office and think, I'm tired of being in pain. Been in pain for months and months and months.
Sometime after my wife died, I was golfing with a friend of mine, so it had to be at least 6, perhaps 8 or 9 months after my wife died. And I was still really feeling the sadness and the grief. I really hadn't worked through it all that much yet, and I was saying to him, I wish this would just go away.
It's kind of like that experience that you have whenever you're driving somewhere new for the first time, and somebody tells you it's only 3 miles, it's really easy to find, and you're driving and you're going, did I miss my turn? Did I miss my turn? I've not done this before. And the whole time you have this sense, am I doing it right? And as soon as that question comes into our mind, am I doing it right? The necessary implication is maybe I'm doing it wrong. And wrong is a guilt word. And then I begin to beat myself up because I can't even grieve right.
And this friend of mine just stopped. He stopped cold. He turned and faced me directly on. He said, look, Bob, it took you 28 years for you and your wife to weave your life together. It's been torn apart. There are all kinds of ragged edges. Don't expect those ragged edges to go away instantly.
Hi, I'm David Guthrie, and this is my wife, Nancy. We've moved further down the trail that we started in our last GriefShare session. It helps us illustrate the journey of grief you will travel as you heal.
Ask any park ranger, and he'll tell you that lots of people set out on journeys that they're not ready for. And it's easy to see why this happens. People either underestimate the difficulty of a trail, or they overestimate their own abilities, and pretty soon, they're deep in the woods, lost, exhausted, and scared.
The same thing can happen on the journey of grief. This is a journey you never wanted to go on, and when you started on it, you probably didn't think it would take this long or be so intense. You may even be wondering if something is wrong with you. Perhaps you feel lost, exhausted, and scared.
In today's GriefShare, we'll help you understand why grief takes time, and how your circumstances and the choices you make affect its intensity and duration.
Thanks for joining us.
In our last session, we mentioned that everyone's journey of grief is unique. One reason that's true is because each of us is grieving a unique relationship.
But your grieving process will also be shaped by the circumstances surrounding your loved one's death and the choices you make afterward.
Your circumstances and the choices you make also affect how intense your grief is and how quickly the pain will subside.
So today, we want to share some of the unique individual factors that directly affect your journey. And the first one is how well you take care of yourself.
I think so often we think of grief as a purely emotional struggle, as if it were just this constellation of sadness and fear and anger and confusion. But one of the things that often gets neglected is how much of a physical toll we go through in the process of grief. And so a few points that I would recommend to folks as they prepare for these early stages of grief is, as much as you can, make sure that you sleep well. Sleep is a good thing, and it's a gift from God. I think it's okay to pray for sleep. If you're having trouble sleeping, talk to your physician and go to them. And this is not necessarily a long-term struggle where you would always need assistance with sleep, but during this season where you're going through such a physical toll, that's important. Oftentimes sleep gets disrupted, especially if who we lost was a spouse, because so much of that evening routine of just there being not somebody there with me, and the time when I'm getting ready to sleep can be a time of intense remembering my loss. And so taking some additional steps of doing something very soothing and relaxing, like taking a hot bath, playing some quiet music in the background so that my thoughts can attach to the music and my thoughts just aren't there to spin with no destination. And that becomes the time when I can't sleep because I'm thinking most. Another aspect of dealing with the physical toll of grief is diet and exercise.
I'm not looking to be Rambo. I'm just doing that to get my arms moving and my legs going. So I go to the gym. I just go in there and I do bicycling for 20 minutes. Then from there I go weights. Weights I do no more than 20 pounds. And then from there I go on the treadmill. And the treadmill I do for about 10 minutes.
I had to develop a strategy of how I'm going to live because I was so used to my wife's cooking. And I would go to a local all-you-can-eat buffet that would weigh the food for you to take out. And my strategy was to not get macaroni and cheese, things that were heavy, vegetables, get the meats. It costs the same no matter whether it's meat or string beans. So I get meats, I get roast beef, chicken, pork, and fish and shrimp, and load that all into the container, weigh that, go home, break it out in containers that was portions for me to eat, just a meal, and freeze the rest. Just get meats, because I could deal with vegetables from the grocery store and frozen out of can, but cooking the meats, they had to be specially done by somebody who know how to cook.
A good way to make sure you take care of yourself is to remember the acronym DEAR. Drink fluids, eat, exercise, and get rest. And be sure to get a checkup from your doctor, too.
In addition to self-care, the way your loved one died also affects your grief experience.
There's a lot of factors that can impact how grief influences you. One would be, how long did I have to anticipate this loss that was coming? Was it at the end of a long bout of cancer? Did it come out of the blue as a car accident when I wasn't expecting it at all?
Your loved one was terminally ill and they've been suffering for 6 months or a year or 2 years or maybe 5 years. You discover that you've done a lot of your grieving in advance. And after they have died, then maybe the grief doesn't last that long. And you're faced with another situation because other people wonder, why aren't you grieving? They begin to question your love for them. They begin to question the relationship with them. And here is another situation or case where we need to let people know, I grieved for several years before they died. I did it before that event occurred.
When you lose someone who is younger than you, a child or a younger sibling, that seems so unnatural to the life cycle that it can be very disorienting to life. When you lose someone your own age, it is something that makes you face your own mortality in a way that maybe you weren't prepared for or thinking about.
If your loved one died in an accident, was murdered, or committed suicide, you'll have to deal with some unique challenges as you grieve. And we'll talk more about what those are and how to deal with them in Session 8.
Another factor that affects your grief journey is what was going on in your life prior to or just after your loved one died.
When my mom passed away, I can't even get a chance to grieve because I got to run around and I got to, plan her funeral and everything. And then 2 weeks later, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be able to grieve now. And then 2 weeks later, Kareem dies.
I was losing my job a month after my dad passed away, so it was a rough time of life. It's the first time I've ever been let go of a job. and first time I've lost a parent.
My grief was very much affected when a close friend committed suicide a couple months after my mom had her tragedy.
Less than a year and a half after I got back from Vietnam, my dad died, and suddenly. And so I think at his funeral, all I could think about and all I could see was, as they were lowering his casket, the flood of memories kept coming back of my two earlier brothers' deaths, which had just taken place within 2 years.
I felt like I didn't get a chance to grieve, then I got pregnant.
Another thing that happens in terms of creating the impact of grief is how we associate the loss with things that were going on at the same time. Sometimes we do that through regret. And we say, if only grandma had lived 2 weeks longer, then she would have made it to the wedding. And there's the kind of this permanent regret memory attachment to my wedding and the loss of grandma. Other times it is association. And we begin to think, we went to the beach and that was the last thing that we did together before I lost them. I don't know that I'll ever go to the beach the same way again. Or sometimes it's through guilt. And we begin to think right around the time that I lost this person, I had also cheated or fudged a little on my taxes. And I wonder if this is God getting back at me. And whatever the events are around our loss, I think we have to be very careful about the kind of meaning that we attach to that. Because those are going to be some of the things that we carry with us for the longest time, even after the grief has subsided, is the meaning that we give to events like that.
In our last session, we shared some key goals of grief recovery.
And there's a relationship between the goals of grief and the journey of grief, which is this. The more effort you put into pursuing those goals, the sooner you'll heal from the pain.
The trouble is, accomplishing these objectives isn't easy. In fact, your efforts can seem to be only adding to your pain. So many people resist trying in the first place.
Several people told me, well, talk about it. Talk about him. Talk about what you're feeling. Get it out. And I didn't want to get it out. I wanted to stuff it and just hurt because I didn't want reality. I didn't want to feel the pain.
But there's no escape from actually facing the pain of grieving and going through it.
I would say, tell me something you remember about Grandpa that you loved most. And so for them, it was a way for them to be able to talk about their grandpa. Of course, we would all cry our heads off. They would afterwards get out a box of pictures. We'd spread the pictures out on the floor. We would talk about things that we did. We'd share memories with one another. We'd cry. And then all three of the kids would pile up on my lap and we'd boo-hoo for a while. And one afternoon, my youngest daughter had said to me, Mom, why do you get all this stuff out and make everybody sad? And I said, no, you don't understand, honey. I'm not trying to make everybody sad. We're already sad. I said, I want to get these pictures out and look at them and remember your dad and cry if I have to. And I'm going to keep doing it until one day I can look at these pictures and smile again. Then I'll know I'm healed. And I think we have to do some of that in the grief process, because I think part of not healing from grief is not wanting to go to those places that hurt too much. And yet going to those places that hurt too much is the very thing that heals us.
Most of us as human beings do not want to experience the pain. We just want to avoid it. And that's what I did. I just avoided it and went on with life. But it becomes a burden.
It's kind of like a wound. When Vinny had his second surgery, his stitches had come apart. He had had his kidney, prostate, bladder, and lymph nodes removed. It was a huge incision. The stitches came apart. He was put on a wound vac for 3 months. During that time, a nurse came to the home 3 days a week, unpacked the sponges and the bandages, had to clean all that up, had to redo the wound 3 times a week. It was a gaping hole. It was excruciatingly painful for him. And I would go and he'd grab my hand and hold on to it through this whole process. I realized later after Vinny died it was interesting that God showed me that process because dealing with our grief is pretty much the same. We have to go to that place that's painful. We have to reopen those wounds. It's the only way we can be cleansed and we can be healed. If Finney had told the nurse, "This is too painful, go away," it might have looked okay for a while on the outside, but on the inside, infection would have grown. And I think that can happen to people in the grief journey, which will make it a lot longer.
And our promise from God in going through is that He will be with us all the way on that journey. So when we talk about and think about this journey, I think it's important that we do use that word, we're walking through grief. We're going through the pain in order to heal, because pain does heal.
So I highly recommend people just go to those places, look at those pictures, even though it's painful. Go to those places that you visited that were special. Don't avoid that restaurant that was your favorite restaurant. Go there with a friend. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, you will cry. But yes, it will help you move through the journey a lot faster.
I immediately went back to work so that I didn't have to think about my father's death.
For 5 years, Amy refused to talk about her dad, look at videos of him, or do anything that would remind her of her father.
I was very fearful of going through any process that would make me have to revisit my father's death. I was afraid the pain would open a door to something that I couldn't handle.
Eventually, Amy's attempts to avoid pain hurt her even more.
I started experiencing depression. It was slow at first. It began with just overwhelming feelings of being discontent. And it started escalating, and eventually depression and the emptiness was more overwhelming than the thought of facing the grief.
As much as she was hurting, Amy was able to function for a while.
From the outside, no one could really tell what was happening. I was into my work. I was being social. I was close to my family and no one noticed, but on the inside, again, I felt those feelings of discontentment and emptiness, and I knew something was wrong. The process of finally dealing with the grief began with GriefShare. It's very much like going to the ocean and wanting to take a swim. You've got that initial wave that comes at you, and then you have to face it, let it come over you, and then you shake yourself off and get ready for the next one. And the process of GriefShare helped me do that. With each wave that came, with each new lesson that I learned, I was able to let it wash over me, process it, and use it to move forward.
These days, Amy can face the reality of her father's death and comfort herself with his memories.
I love talking about my father now. I love sharing his stories. I love watching videos. I love looking at the pictures, the memories. He was a wonderful man. Now I feel like, having accepted the loss, I can now celebrate the life he had and feel joy for those times.
So you must hurt in order to heal. But as Amy discovered, God graciously keeps the pain from overwhelming us.
As it says in Isaiah 42:3, A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. The journey of grief is certainly an overwhelming experience, but as you pursue healing and grow in your dependence on God, you'll discover that He is gently caring for you and keeping you from being crushed in this season of your life.
So, when do you think you'll go through your husband's clothes?
I don't know. I've been avoiding that.
This might not work for you, but I found that it helped me to go through it as soon as possible. I just didn't want all those things sitting around reminding me of her. It was too painful.
No, I don't know about that.
Well, don't feel rushed. It took me a long time to go through my husband's things.
But my kids, they keep pressuring me to go through everything right now. Sometimes I just want to tell them to do it yourself. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to sort through his things.
So I still have my mother's purse, which she had on her possession when she went to the hospital. And in this purse was just personal things, her lipsticks, her wallet, all of, whatever credit cards, whatever license and everything. She had a little rain cap. And so it still sits in the top of my closet till this day. I haven't been able to just relinquish that. And the relinquishing is more of, well, what is the proper thing to do?
With my personality, I wanted a list. I wanted a checklist. I wanted to know, after so many days, you can stop wearing the ring, or you can take the pictures off of the refrigerator, or all of the framed photos that you have, then it's time to take those away.
What do I do with the things that are in his closet? What do I do with the things that we have here in the house that belonged to our loved one and I don't need them? They feel like if they get rid of something, maybe clothes or objects that belonged to their loved one, they are somehow betraying that person. They may feel confused. Does that mean I love that person less now because I'm getting rid of these things?
But I realized there's not a checklist like that. And that you kind of just have to trust your heart, trust you'll know when it's time, which in that moment, it feels crazy. I just knew that it was not time for me to take off my engagement ring. And so I kept wearing it for a number of months. And then one day I thought, I think I could put this in a box and I think I could give this to David's mom someday. It just, or I think it's time that I could put David's picture into a scrapbook or into my prayer book. I think it's okay.
After a loved one dies, you're often faced with the question about what to do with all of his or her belongings.
You may be surprised to learn that what you do with those items will also affect your grief journey.
The process of going through their possessions can help you reach some of your grief goals.
When Rick died, my only daughter was home from college as a freshman there for the funeral. And she seemed really intent to go through all of Rick's, her dad's, belongings, not so much because she wanted anything from that, but just because she thought it would be very, very helpful for me that I didn't have to deal with all the stuff. And I think that that's often true, that people around us think that they're doing grieving people a favor by just getting rid of everything quickly. So, because otherwise it will hurt or it will be painful for people to have to go through all the stuff. And what they don't really realize is that that's like a gold mine for grieving people.
After a person dies, all of the physical stuff that they had accumulated or used or wore is still there in the house. And I know that after my wife died, all of that was there, and I had to deal with it. What I didn't realize at the time that I started going through that stuff is that helped me work on almost all of the goals of grief that I think are involved in this grief journey. It helped me, for example, to realize she's not coming back. I mean, I took one look at the closets and they were stuffed full of her clothing, and I had to take those out and put it somewhere. And I knew that I was doing that because she wouldn't be back to wear that.
Looking at all the belongings of a deceased person elicits emotions for people where they can remember, I remember when she or he got this and they wore it to this event, and it may bring smiles, it may bring tears, but it does bring memories, and that's so important for us when we're grieving.
In order for you to benefit from sorting through your loved one's belongings, you must go through them yourself.
And if you feel like you can't do it now, that's okay. Just wait until you can.
I had to say, Sarah, I know you want to go through this stuff and you think it's going to be helpful, and I'll do some of it with you, but I'm not ready to get rid of everything. I want to go through this and I want to keep it there.
And you do it progressively. In the counseling setting, a counselor would work with a person to help them, we call it exposure, to expose them to the fearful situation, but progressively. It doesn't mean you're suddenly walk into that room, but it might be one day just walk close to the door. Might be another day just crack the door open a little bit. Might be the next day you just crack the door open a little bit and turn on the light. And finally, it will come a day when you can walk into that.
Day at a time, and just kind of trust that you'll know when the time is right to make that next step. And no one else could tell me. Like if a girlfriend would have come over and said, okay, Cindy, it's time to take down these pictures, that would have been very painful for me. Like it was something that I had to decide just by walking through it.
I can't go through his things right now. He was quite a pack rat. We have things from his first office from 1993 still up in our storage room. Old fax machines and records, and it's a lot to go through, but I can't. I know sooner or later I'll have to. I just have to hold the right hand of Jesus.
I actually, at this point, have cleaned out virtually all of his clothes and donated them for the homeless in Raleigh. The process was ready and it was right when it happened. I just refused to let people push me into their time zone. Their life wasn't my life. When someone just said, it's been 8 months, it's like, yes, I know. I'm just not ready yet. When I'm ready, I would love to have your help.
Our God is the God of all comfort.
I can still remember that first night going to bed alone. And as I closed the door in my room, I remember just crying out 2 words to God, help me, help me. And He did.
I waited till everybody went to work, everybody went to school. We had a treadmill on the 3rd floor, and I would go up there and run as hard as I could and scream as loud as I could and know that no one could hear me but God, and yet it really brought great relief.
And as a pastor, I've heard that from God's people so many times, where they have said to me during the time of their grief, I sense God's presence more than ever before. I sense the prayers of God's people more than ever before. I'm finding a level of strength and hope like never before. God's word is true. He's comforting me, and this opportunity of grief is helping me see that in a fresh and powerful way.
What brought me the most comfort from my grief was developing my relationship with God. I took the time that I had, that I was alone, and I spent it with God. And I developed my relationship with Him by reading my Bible and by reading devotionals. God was really speaking to me through His Word. And I would take those things and I would own them for myself. I would take certain scripture verses and I would own them for myself.
It is important for us to turn to God, to cry out to Him, to go to Him. James 4 says, "Draw near unto God, and He'll draw near unto you." So every grieving person has the responsibility to draw near to God. And we draw near to God in a number of ways. We draw near to God in prayer. We draw near to God by going to God's Word.
And I now have a place I call God's place. When you say, why do you call it God's place? Well, I used to sit out there and read the Bible. As I'm reading the Bible, I feel a little warmth on my right shoulder here. I says, what's that? So I look up and there's, between the trees, I have trees in the back, the sun is shining through, and with a little empty spot in the trees where the branches and leaves are coming through, shining right on my shoulder. So I said to my daughter, Rob, this is what I experienced. She says, Dad, do you know what that is? That's God and Margaret smiling.
Keeping a written journal is one more choice that can make your grieving process less confusing and disorienting.
Journaling helps you acknowledge thoughts and feelings that are sometimes hard to identify.
You may have a feeling inside of you. You don't really quite know what that's like, but when you're kind of forcing yourself to put a word to it and put it on a piece of paper, it often will help clarify what that is. Am I really angry, or am I sad, or am I regretting something? And to put that down and to see how your thinking and your feelings are going together or not going together, because a lot of times what you're saying to yourself affects how you feel about it.
Sometimes I hear people saying, I'm not sure that I am moving forward. But if the individual has been journaling, what we can do is to go back and look at the first month of their journaling and compare it now to their 10th month, and they realize, oh, look at the differences, look at the changes.
It's not real prettified when I'm writing it. It's pretty country sounding, but it didn't matter. It was just what was coming out of me, and I wrote those down, and I kept it up. I didn't think it was doing anything for me, but I kept doing it anyway. I look back on that journal about 6 months later, after I'd forced myself to do it, and I read back in some of those early days, and I recognized immediately, wow, I have made some progress.
It was also a way of validating myself as I did it, because it says what you think and feel, Susan, is important. Then I took it to the next level and said, so that was uncomfortable or hurtful or upsetting to me this time. How am I going to handle it next time? And so it was a good lead in for me to start preparing myself, like, I think I need to do this, or I think that would be helpful for me next time.
At first I started pouring out about my sorrow, how much I miss mom, sister. And then eventually I think I swung to a direction where I just started talking about life in general. You know, I went from, I miss her, I miss you, I miss you, here's what I'm doing today, to this is what God is doing in my life. This is what my grandson is doing. This is what my children is doing. I still mention mom, you know, but not as much, or sister much as much as I did when I first started.
You know, one of the things that people say that really helps them in the process of grieving is journaling, writing. And I really believe that it's because of that action of moving a pen or even typing on a keyboard is related to knowing that there's something going on right now. And the brain starts thinking about whatever is going on now. Even if you're recollecting things from the past, you're putting your attention to an action that is only going on now. It's not going to happen in the future, and it's not that it happened in the past, but you're focusing your attention to the present moment. And sure enough, people say that is something that really helps them.
Your GriefShare workbook has a number of prompts to help you get started journaling.
You can find them at the end of each week's note-taking section. Try to complete this week's journaling exercise and see what you think.
This week's From Mourning to Joy exercises introduce you to David. Learn how he got comfortable asking others to help him after his wife's death. Plus, you'll find hope and encouragement as you complete each of this week's exercises. During the next session of GriefShare, discover how grief affects your relationships.
I was chatting with a girlfriend on the phone, and she was complaining about how messy her husband was leaving the kitchen lately. I said, you know, I wish I had that problem.
Sometimes people will share a truth with you that has meant a lot to them, but it feels like a slap in the face to you.
I don't really think there's any way people can get through grieving if they're with people the majority of the time.
The journey of grief is long and tiresome. But as you've seen today, there are things you can do to make it more bearable.
In coming GriefShare sessions, we'll continue to share insights that will help you move from painful memories of your loved one's death to less intense feelings in which you cherish his or her memory.
This is important information that you won't want to miss. And remember, you're welcome to invite a friend or family member who is grieving to join this group. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.